welcome to another future classic episode of Retrovaniacs, the only podcast called Retrovaniacs you're going to listen to today. As always, I'm your host, Jeremy Parmentier, here with Jeremy Gregory.
I'm also future classic.
And Billy Holiday.
Hello.
And much like every week, before we talk about our game of the week, I'm going to ask, Jeremy, what have you been playing since last episode?
Well, mostly a bunch of free stuff, it seems like. Been playing a lot of betas and technical, whatever the hell they are, with like Titanfall 2 and Battlefield 1. Those betas kind of went up, and I played both of those, and really thought I was going to love Titanfall 2 and just kind of be on Battlefield 1, because it's just kind of how I've been with Battlefields for a while now. Ended up being the complete opposite. Actually, I ended up loving Battlefield 1, and Titanfall 2 actually let me down a good bit. I am not really as excited for that game as I used to be. Me and Billy played the original Titanfall a good deal, and it's really fun. It's still really fun just to get in there and play. But this new Titanfall is they've changed it a bit. It really feels more like Call of Duty now than just the insanity that was the original Titanfall. They've really kind of toned down a lot of things, and there was a really big backlash for it online during the beta, and Respawn, the developer, they said they are going to change a lot of things for when the game comes out. So we'll see if they get around to changing some of that stuff back to making it feel like the old Titanfall. But as it stands right now, Battlefield 1 really blew me away. Like, that is just, it really feels like classic Battlefield. I really got started with Battlefield back in 1942. Not the actual year, but the game. I'm not that old yet. Me and my friend Bronny, we played that for probably hundreds of hours back in the day. And this one, it really kind of brings back some of that, simplistic charm of the original, and just some of the insanity that you can have with these kind of old-timey weapons and vehicles and stuff like that. It's got a certain charm to it that Battlefield hasn't had in a long time to me. It's felt very sterile. This one really has a lot of personality to it. It owes a lot of that to the World War I setting. It's just also really fun to play. So I think I'm actually going to end up with Battlefield 1 over Titanfall 2, which is kind of blowing my mind.
Yeah, and I didn't get to play either yet. I saw my son play a little bit of Titanfall 2, and it looks like, I hope a lot of things change, because essentially the changes made in Titanfall 2 where they removed everything fun from the first one and then presented it. The big gimmick of getting into your Titan, the big mech you have on there, they have made much more difficult. It's like a kill streak thing now instead of it coming over time, no matter how you're playing, which is one of the things I think they plan on changing. But he played it. I watched him play it a while. I just no appeal at all. Like Jeremy said, it's just like another Call of Duty right now.
No, it's the one thing that really made the first Titanfall so much fun was everyone was going to get that mech at some point. It was on a countdown timer. No matter how badly you did, you were always going to get that mech at least 2 or 3 times around. And the way they made it this time, being more skill-based or whatever, I can see, why they would do that. But it takes so much fun out of that game. Just, and especially if you're on a bad team and you're just getting wrecked by another team that can call down, they're calling down Titans all the time because they're just wrecking your team, and your team has no way to come back because you're not going to be able to call in anything. It's just not fun. And it just brings out the absolute worst things that I hate about Call of Duty. And it seems like that's what they focused on with Titanfall 2.
Well, I didn't, I still don't have a current system as far as I'm concerned. I have a Wii U, but that's no longer current. But what I did do, I was out 2 weekends ago. I went to a NASCAR race that was for Labor Day weekend, so I didn't have a whole lot of time to play. I've had a lot of work going on, so I haven't really focused on anything outside of today's game. But my oldest son is 4, almost 5, and he's finally getting into playing video games, which is something I didn't necessarily want, but since he is going to play, I'm going to support him because I enjoy playing some video games, and it's something we can do together. So he is now arguably playing with me Super Mario 3D World, which is one that I had bought that for Wii U, and I didn't care for it. I thought I'd rather play the straight up Super Mario Brothers U, the regular 2D Mario. I'm not a big fan of this kind of half 2D, 3D Mario. But actually playing with him is pretty fun. I have to say he's getting better. It's fun to see him learn how to actually play this. But the first few levels, and Billy, I know you say you've played some games with your son. He's a lot older than mine, but I watching him basically fall into the same pit over and over and over again and not figure out to jump over it for about 2 hours, it about killed me. It was incredible, but about killed me.
There's a degree of difficulty to playing video games with a young child, especially when it's yours. And if you yell at them, you're going to have to deal with them for the rest of the day. If it was a stranger, if it's a kid, with arcade, my all-time pet peeve of the kids that are just holding on to the joysticks, playing in the arcade with no quarters in. You can yell at those kids. You can yell at them. You can shoo them away. You still can't strike them yet. Maybe one day. But when it's your own, there's a fine line you have to walk. And my son, he's older now and he's adequate at games. But there was a time, when he was younger, and he played a lot of 64 games with me. And once again, Mario, I think was probably the one I introduced him on, Mario 64. And just simple things, and you start to wonder where you went wrong as a parent, that your child cannot figure out this simple task, or to make this one jump, and they're shown the results of not doing it over and over, yet they still commit the same mistake. It's frustrating. But,
it's incredibly frustrating. And there's a couple levels in there where they give you a very short time frame, like 100-second time frame to get through the level, and he's just like, Dad, look at this flower, and blowing into the pad because it makes the flower spin or whatever, and I'm like, we have 30 seconds! 30 seconds! And so he, of course, cries, and I feel very bad about it. But other than that, I told you guys a couple weeks ago I did buy Sonic Colors because I had some sort of breakdown where I wanted a Sonic game. And I did finish that this morning. I did manage to beat the last boss of that. I actually have to say, if you're going to look for a 3D Sonic Colors is about as good as it gets, although the last handful of levels are straight up garbage. But other than that, not a bad game at all.
I mean, that's kind of par for the course with just about every Sonic game, really.
Yeah, there's a lot of... They don't really need the wiggle controls, but to make your, the special powers you get from the wisps come out, which is the gimmick for Sonic Colors, these different colored, magical wisps you find that turn you into a drill or a laser beam or all these other things. You have to shake the remote a bunch to make it happen, to take advantage of that wee wiggle. But other than that, it doesn't use too much motion control. It's not super annoying. But then when you finally get to the last couple levels is where... there's some camera angle issues. There's a lot of things going on that I don't know how you'd possibly avoid without doing the level over and over again. And that's the first time in the whole game where that happens. So it does still have some annoying 3D Sonicness, but, for a 3D Sonic, very solid, and I highly recommend it.
I still want to finish that one up. Well, maybe not really after what you said, but I think I got to the past the first 3 worlds and kind of put it down. Meant to go back to it, but never did.
The last 3 worlds, not the very last world, but the other worlds you unlock after those first 3 are actually really cool and interesting. Although there is, I have to warn you, Billy, there's a whole water section where there is some breath running out and the music changes. You may want to skip that world.
My heart rate has tripled. Since you've announced that.
And it's still there. It's still got the same issues as any underwater Sonic. But I think there were actually a fair amount of water bubbles and things to find in this door. I didn't drown other than when my own foolishness put me in a place I shouldn't have been. So maybe it's not as bad as the old Sonics. But Billy, what have you been playing since last time?
Well, what have I been playing? The 2 or 3 people that want to know more about our personal lives are going to be pleased with this one. Because I have recently started a workout routine. I've concluded here in my mid-30s, if I'm ever going to be in shape for the first time in my life, I probably have about another year or 2 to do it before it becomes impossible. So I'm trying that, and that's become what I've done after work. And after work is usually my video game playing time. So it's cut in considerably. But the fortunate thing is I will probably only stick to this about another week before I give up. I'll be back. But in the meantime, I have squeezed in a little bit. I'm still playing that Dragon's Age Inquisition, highly enjoying it. I'm playing Overwatch again. Season 2 of their competitive mode came around, and they did indeed fix some of the things that were really bothering me the first time around. I finished up Fallout 4. As far as I know, with nothing else coming out for it, then that's probably the conclusion. I'll be starting it again one day eventually. But really not a lot. No Man's Sky still has been one of my, put it on a half hour before bed games. But nothing new really from the previous weeks.
You ready for that BioShock collection?
Oh, I tried to get out there this week, and I'm trying to hold off because I know I'm going to run into that thing where I'm going to be itching to play it, and I'm going to have to spend the entire night installing it, and I'm going to be cursing. I'm going to be up like 2 hours later than I intended. So I decided I'm just going to wait until the weekend.
Well, it does sound like a lot of us didn't have too much time to play, but hopefully we all had time to play this week's game, Air Zonk, for the Turbografx-16. This was a listener request. It came from Marty, who is a regular listener of Retrovaniacs. But this is also a game I would have put on the list. It's one I did own, and I had played previously, but I believe neither of you had played this before the podcast, correct?
Nope. I always saw it kind of playing on the Turbografx demo station in Toys R Us, and it always looked amazing, but I never actually got to play it.
No, and I never played this one. I never really saw anything from it outside of just, in the magazines.
Well, Air Zonk is a shooter, but more importantly, did either of you guys play either of the Bonk's Adventure or Bonk's Revenge for Turbografx, or even when they put it out later on the, I want to say Super Nintendo had a version as well?
Now, I played the original Bonk by many years after the fact. I did get to play it through. Bonk's Revenge, I have not.
I'm the same way. The first time I actually played Bonk was on the Wii Virtual Console.
Mm-hmm.
And my girlfriend at the time thought it looked cute, so I bought it, and I played it. I ended up really enjoying it. I remember it as a kid. That was the Turbografx mascot, basically, since every console back then had to have a mascot. And Bonk was that mascot. So, it always looked cool when I was a kid, but of course I didn't have a Turbografx, and I wasn't crazy enough to own one. So by the time I actually did play it, I kind of felt bad because, it's really, really fun.
Yeah, the Bonk games were definitely flagship titles for the system. They made the mistake that, a lot of, I guess, early systems have, where they didn't really have a mascot. Mario's been around for Nintendo pretty much since the start. Sega didn't really get Sonic until later. They definitely didn't have it in the Master System, and then even when the Genesis released, it came with Altered Beast. They eventually had Sonic, and then he became the pack-in title pretty much from there on out. The Turbografx came with Keith Courage that we reviewed 20 episodes ago. Spoilers, not huge fans. But later on they realized we need a good mascot. No one wants, this was a weird anime tie-in for Keith Courage, so they created Bonk, who's a tiny, giant-headed caveman who uses his head to hit enemies to hurt them. He can jump up in the air and spin down and smash his head into the ground. So his name was Bonk. It's a fairly short game. I think it's 5 levels, 6 levels, with windy levels in between, 1, 4, 2, 4, 3, 4, 4, 4, and that's World 4. I think it's only 5 worlds. So, but it's one that anyone who's played a Turbografx has probably played Bonk. Even if you played nothing else on the system, that's what you remember the Turbografx for. So after Bonk and the sequel Bonk's Revenge, they were going to build that brand out some more, so they released Air Zonk in 1992 in between Bonk's Revenge and Bonk 3, which was the game that had the giant bonks and the tiny bonks. But Air Zonk is not directly Bonk, I guess a distant relative, but looks very similar. The art style is incredibly similar, but instead of being a side-scrolling action game like Bonk's Adventure was, this is a straight shooter, but with definitely some very cartoony elements and some great throwbacks to the Bonk series if you were a fan, but if you weren't, you still didn't miss out.
I believe they called these types of games cute-em-ups, I believe, if I want to use the correct terminology.
That's probably right, because it is definitely, I'd say it's that cute, super cartoony anime style, but not serious anime, but like, I don't know, I'm not a big anime guy, but the more kid-oriented anime. Big eyes, big tears.
Yeah. It looks like the most early 90s Saturday morning cartoon show you could ever imagine.
No tentacles in it that I saw.
There were no tentacles. It is definitely a kid's game. It's not. It's not an adult-themed shoot 'em up. It's definitely a kid's game. Here's just a side note, and I know neither of you will care about this, but I was very excited when I remembered this. So when the Turbografx came out in the United States for the first, while, and they still looked like they were going to succeed, every game came packed in a CD-sized plastic case that would hold the game itself, a manual, and like a sleeve to put the game in, because the Turbografx games are those little plastic cards. Well, by the end of the system's time in the U.S., and I'm sure the company had changed hands to whatever, but it was still being labeled the Turbografx-16, the games just came, when you bought a box in the store, you just got a loose game and a sleeve to put it in, and then a manual. There was no longer the case for it. So I had bought Air Zonk, it was towards the end of the system. It never had a case, and I got probably 4 or 5 other games that were very similar. And for whatever reason, and I don't know if it's just because it didn't have a case and therefore it wasn't sitting on the shelf and drawing my attention, when I owned Air Zonk, I think I played it all of 8 times. I never got very far in it. I know I got through at least the 3rd level, and then I never finished it. It was never a game that called to me that often, other than the fact that it was supposed to look like Bonk, and it was kind of an oddball shooter. It wasn't notable enough for me at the time to really focus on. So when this was recommended, I was actually excited because I could go back and try it again and say, okay, why didn't I think I liked this before? Was it just that it wasn't a good game, or was it that I just don't know what I'm talking about and had other things to play, or was it just, at the time that I got the game, that system was already kind of on its way out, even on my shelf. I wasn't sure. So, yeah, I just thought that was an interesting tidbit about how they pack the games in, which no one else will care about. But I'm very glad I shared it.
They were like, Turbografx was the first system that actually did that whole, like, the CD kind of packaging. It looked super cool and like futuristic at the time, because it was like, oh man, there's, especially like when the actual CDs came out, you're like, oh my god, there's like a CDs in there. That's awesome. But yeah, it's I never really got to play this one at all. So when you guys mentioned it, I was pretty excited to actually sit down and try out some Air Zonk for myself.
I was not excited at all. As soon as I think I made the joke last episode that I sure hope our next game's not on Turbografx, because we want to continue our good game streak. And then to my horror did I learn that we were returning to the Turbografx-16, which I have not had the best opinion of a lot of the offerings on there. But I did feel a little better when I learned this is in the, however loosely, in the Bonk universe. And I did go and I looked up some video of it, and it looked like a lot of fun. And it reminded me of one of my favorite NES games, Stinger. Stinger is essentially the same thing. It's kind of a real bizarre, just kind of wacky enemies. It's a side-scrolling shooter. So I went into this one with an open mind, and I remained hopeful. I figured I'll give the Turbografx one more chance.
It's very
I had known that like Air Zonk was decent. Like I remember it actually getting decent reviews in magazines back when I was a kid. But the reason I never really wanted to play it, very much or sought it out was just because it was a shooter, and I'm not a big fan of shooters.
Yeah,
never have been at all. So I just kind of put it in the back of my mind, and I was definitely interested in trying it out for this episode.
Well, Air Zonk is a shooter, so it follows most of the standard side-scrolling shooter mechanics. You go from one side of the screen, the left side of the screen, towards the right side of the screen through every level. There are pick-em-ups you'll find. They look like almost like floating plants, and you'll shoot the floating plants, and they'll have different power-ups for your ship. Now, it's not a graded power-up, so it's not like you have different levels of each type of gun, but you'll pick up, the looks like a bone boomerang, I guess, and then all of a sudden your Bonk starts shooting, or Air Zonk, I'm sorry, throws these boomerangs that are made of bone or whatever towards the screen. and then there's about a handful of other guns that are all, there's a spread shot style gun. There is a like a laser. There's a one of the options makes your character much smaller, but therefore easier to dodge bullets. And he shoots kind of like not a homing shot, but a shot that will home directionally at enemies. It ends up making things much easier as long as you have a power-up. Plus, those power-ups are essentially your life bar. You get hit one time if you're in your basic form and you lose a life. You'll come back in right where you died, thankfully, until you run out of lives, so you don't go back to a checkpoint or anything. But if you have a special weapon, you get hit once, you lose the special weapon, you get hit again, you die. So getting the special weapons is also important to make sure you can stay alive, because it's a shooter. There's going to be bullets and things flying at you. What makes this different to me than most shooters was the companion system. Each level, depending on if you decided to go with the game automatically picking a partner for you, or if you could pick your partner at random or on purpose, there are 10 characters that you can pick from that will join you in the levels. There are 5 levels in this game, and every time you use a companion, you can't use them again. So if you go to the first level and you take, it looks like a kind of a flying cat companion, you won't be able to use them again in levels 2 through 5. You've used them in level 1, and that's it. You also can't change your companion once you start. What makes the companions more interesting than just having something else on the screen that's shooting at enemies, which is what the companions essentially do at first, is that eventually, as you're killing enemies in the levels, you get a bunch of smiley faces. After 7 smiley faces, you get a giant smiley face. That giant smiley face, once you grab it, is how you earn your companion the first time. You do it again, get 7 more smiley faces, get the giant smiley face, if your companion is still on the screen, because he apparently has some kind of invisible life bar. After so many hits and so much damage, your companion will vanish. But if he doesn't vanish and you get that second giant smiley face, you merge with that companion and become invincible for 30 seconds and kind of become this weird amalgamation of yourself and that companion with attacks that generally will destroy everything around you. So once
it should be said you're invincible for the remainder. Not just sit through. I mean, yeah, the invincibility wears off, but you, and we'll talk about it as we go along, there are a lot of power-ups in this game, and that final form, so to speak, is a force to be reckoned with on any stage.
It definitely makes the stage much easier if you can get to that point. And the early stages especially aren't necessarily hard. Like I said, there's 5 stages, and the first 3, I'd say, on your first playthrough, you should easily get to the boss of the 3rd area without even trying. Without putting a whole lot of effort in, you don't need to get that super form. Just playing it like a basic shooter. The first 2 worlds, fairly straightforward. And then the 3rd world's where it starts actually kind of throwing a few things at you. And I'd say the 4th world's really where the game kind of becomes a more difficult shooter. Now, Jeremy, you said you weren't very good at shooters. Did you have any problems with the earlier levels in this, or do you agree these were also fairly easy shooter levels?
They were, it was fairly easy. I think that's one of the reasons why I like these style of like cute 'em up shooters, is because usually they're a little bit easier than the actual for realsies kind of shooters that are out there. And I didn't really have too much of a problem with this one at all. Also, I'm still laughing at that description of the game that you just gave out, because I know that that's what the game is because we've played it. But if anyone else is actually listening to this and has no idea what Air Zonk is, and they listen to that description, they would think we're on like crack or something, because that it just sounds absolutely insane. It sounds like you just described the most video game-assed video game that has ever existed.
Oh, I think that's a pretty accurate description of this game. This is a very video game-assed video game. It follows everything that you'd want in a shooter. It steals ideas from different games. I mean, the companion was the only thing I thought that was kind of unique and interesting about the mechanics of the game. But it is graphically, it's because of the cartoony look, but also I think it's got very bright and crisp colors. I think it's and each level's enemies are themed to the level and very different. I mean, they're not different in that they shoot at you and you shoot them, but I mean they're, the first level is kind of like a city, you're flying over the city, so it's a lot of general shooter enemies kind of. But when you go to the second level, you're actually flying through the streets in the beginning. So you're fighting, killer street lights and fire hydrants and things that you'd find in a city. And the third level is kind of a sports stadium. So everything you're fighting there is, kind of sports themed, including the bosses. So I like that each level had its own theme. It all fit together and looked like it was the same game, but each level was definitely different and unique, which was also something I liked about Bonk. Those are fairly short levels in Bonk. The worlds are all very different. It's a very bright, colorful game, but it's also a game that's not hard. The Bonk series, in general, not hard games, and I think this has almost the same difficulty level, but for shooters. So I do like how it does feel like a Bonk game, even though it's a completely different style of game.
Yeah, I mean, you can't mistake it. I mean, this is totally a Bonk game or related to a Bonk game, but it is one of the better looking Turbografx games that's out there. I mean, this kind of came along at the end of the system's run, and just so much great scrolling and use of colors, and all the characters are super distinct. There's not much animation in it at all, but everything just stands out so well. And I wish more Turbografx games did this. I kind of went with this style of look because it looks so good on that system.
Yeah, and that's something I was going to remark on. Is I think the previous Turbografx games we played, that was one of my biggest letdowns. None of the games I thought really looked that good. And growing up, I never had a Turbografx. Rarely got to even play on one. I thought that's what I was missing out on. I thought, the graphics on this thing are far superior to anything I have here at home. But that wasn't the case on some of the previous ones we played, but this is just a lovely game. This is pretty much the height of 16-bit graphics. It looks like a cartoon, right off the screen. Yeah, I mean, I can't complain about the graphics on this. This is what I was envisioned when I used to think about the Turbografx-16 and what those games look like.
So, like I mentioned earlier, it's a pretty standard shooter. So there's 5 levels. They all have a mid boss, and a lot of the time that same boss shows up again in a more advanced form as the final boss for each stage. That's nothing groundbreaking. That's pretty much every shooter. But I think at least the weapons are different than most shooters. Like I said, there's a spread shotgun, but instead of being just a spread bullets or something that looks like your regular gun that's got a wider area, instead it makes it so that your Air Zonk character is throwing these playing cards, and he throws the playing cards in such a way that they fan out in front of him, and they do a lot of a much bigger spread area damage. Like I said, there's a laser where he kind of holds looks like a laser pen in his mouth and shoots a laser in front of him that goes an exact width out from him. There was, I think, a series of boxing gloves or like robotic gloves that shoot out. I don't know. Billy, did you like a lot of the weapons in this?
I did, because they were really different. And I think that's one thing. I haven't played a lot of shooters like this. The side scrolling, I got just a little bit here and there. But yeah, there definitely is a lot of similar weapons. If you play enough of those, there's a lack of variety. This game, yeah, is excellent. I was very pleased with how it's just it has those standard. It has your homing weapons. It has some of the heavier hitting weapons. It has the spread. Yeah, but it has its own unique kind of flair, its own personal touch on each one of those weapons, and I really appreciated that.
And being able to charge each one of those weapons basically has a separate use. If you hold down the button and charge it, it completely changes the weapon and how it works. So, I mean, you've got a lot of different choices with how you want to use all of these special weapons, and they all feel great. I mean, none of them feel like they're waste. There's definitely in a lot of these shooters where you grab a power up that you just don't want because it's just not great. And you just like, oh God, I shouldn't have done that. But every single one of these special weapons I picked up, it was fun to use. The game really does a great job of making those weapons just fun to play with.
Were there? I mean, yeah, you said there's none you didn't want, and I would agree with that. There's nothing that I picked it up and I was like, oh, this has ruined my game. But I definitely had some go-tos, and for me, it was definitely those playing cards. In any game where I have a spread shot, I know I can't shoot behind me. It doesn't home. It doesn't do some of the other things the other weapons do. But the fact that I can stand kind of at a certain point of the screen and anything in front of me is going to be wiped out horribly. That's my favorite way to play any shooter. I guess that's the easy button, but I don't care. I'm using that easy button.
I think the cards are definitely, those are the ones to kind of go with. If I couldn't get a hold of those, I definitely wanted the homing missiles. because just charging that up to its second form would clear out an entire screen, and it doesn't take long to charge this stuff up. So those two were definitely, anyone that plays it, I mean, they basically break the game.
And the other, like I said, the companions were made this game different than a lot of other shooters. Did either of you actually go and switch to manual mode, where you pick which companion you want for each level?
No, I just kind of stuck with how it went through with each stage and giving you what it wants. I actually didn't go with manual.
No, I didn't either. I just, I figured my first time playing through, I would just play the cards I was dealt.
I think a lot of the companions, if you play through as automatic, where it just gives you a companion, I think that they don't give you some of the more, I don't want to say interesting, because I did not enjoy them, but some of the non-standard companions. A lot of them, one of the good examples is there was a giant missile, basically, that's one of the companions, and of course when you power up into the merged form, you kind of become a rocket ship that shoots these missiles, or not missiles, but like a wave beam out of the side of your ship that destroys the screen. I mean, that's a great combination. And when you get there's a guy that looks like a giant clear balloon filled with colored balls, but it's dressed like a magician. And that's the worst description ever given, but if you looked at it, that's exactly what it looks like. A cartoon magician made out of a balloon. When you merge with him, basically you are inside the balloon and you're shooting those colored balls all over the screen as little homing balls. I don't think he was in the game when I played through as automatic, but when I did his manual, I played as him and I was like, oh, this is really cool. So then I played and I picked all the different characters. There's definitely some of those companions that make the game much harder than it needs to be, or makes it to where you actually don't want to form and merge with them. You'd rather just have them be the companion. One of them is that there's a little girl that looks like a witch of some sort, and when you merge with her, I don't know what this weapon does. It didn't seem to hurt anybody, but it would set runes around my character that would light up, and then I would get hit with bullets and die. I don't know what else it was supposed to do. It didn't do any damage to anything around me as far as I could see. But every time I tried a couple times, and every time I merged with her, it was like, well, I'm not hurting anybody. I'm just dying. So there's something I'm missing, and much like most Turbografx games, the manual that came with this game was not descriptive in any way, shape, or form over really how the game plays. It told you what the buttons do, and it gave you some very basics, but it's a shooter. So what kind of instruction do you need? Shoot everything that moves and figure the rest out. So it didn't really explain the difference between these characters, just that they existed and they would help you.
Yeah, I had there was one buddy on there that I thought was pretty worthless, and I got him early on. He was essentially almost like a part of a vehicle. You had a big green front with sunglasses and then a big wheel. And when you merge with him, you get a flamethrower, which normally is, that's a good thing to have around. The only trouble I had with that was it had excellent range if you were still. If you moved forward at all, you kind of caught up with it. So you go from shooting, almost 3/4 of the way across the screen to just, a few, like about a foot in front of you. And I took more damage once I merged than I did beforehand, just because of that. You kind of have to just stay still. If you try to move around, your weapon, that flamethrower is useless.
The one that kind of got me was the fish guy. Once you merge with him, some of these, like, you merge with them and you've got this, basically, you just destroy the whole screen in one shot. I mean, some of them are so super powerful that you're almost invincible. And then other ones, you merge with them, you're like, holy shit, what's this guy going to do? He's a fish. He's like a superhero fish guy. What could I possibly do? When you merge with him and you just shoot forward, you shoot fish forward, and then you also shoot fish down. Like they just go forward and then they go down. I mean, that's literally it. And you're just like, well, that's fucked. I mean, I would have been better off with my missile launcher or literally anything else in this game. And I guess that's one of the things you just kind of have to play through and know. And that would actually be good for manual mode, because you could actually know which ones are best, which ones suit the level best, and so on. That would make the game much easier. But for me, just playing, I didn't know what these. Playing this for the first time, I didn't know what these guys were. So some of them, I was just like, holy shit, this is amazing. And then you'd get something like Fish Guy or Green Truck, and just like it was completely underwhelming.
Underwhelming, but still interesting and a nice touch. And the good news is, after that invincibility period wears off, which is about 20 to 30 seconds, if you do get hit while you are combined with your companion, you will go back to bonk with whatever the last set of weapons you had was. So if you turned into your companion and you had the cards, well, your companion's gone after you get hit, but you're still bonk with all the cards. So you're not coming back. You don't die immediately. You don't come back with no good weapon or the basic weapon. You've got whatever you had beforehand. So there's a good chance, even once your companion gets hit and goes away, you're still going to be ready to plow through most of the level, assuming you didn't just get him early or die right before you got the giant smiley face. Which, again, that description is probably confusing many people. So the bosses generally are huge. They're all fairly interesting and very different from standard shooter bosses. I don't know if you guys ever played Fantasy Zone, but a lot of these bosses kind of remind me of how goofy the Fantasy Zone bosses would be.
Mm-hmm.
So the first level boss is that the ship, the giant pirate ship? Again, that's one of those levels where you fight the ship as the mid-boss, and then you'll fight a stronger version of the ship later as the end. Just a giant cartoony ship. Nothing too crazy there, I don't think, and or noteworthy about that boss, except that it's a big, cartoony, beautiful to look at, but otherwise fairly unimpressive boss.
It seems like a lot of these bosses are just kind of bullet sponges. They kind of just shoot out in random directions, and you do your best to dodge them. I guess I'm just kind of talking about every fucking shooter boss in history, but there's something about these where they kind of don't move and they don't really do anything special. They just kind of seem like they're a big sprite, non-animated sprite that's hanging out on the screen, and it kind of just looks like you're shooting at like clip art, something that you would find online or something like back in the early 2000s. But they've all got this weird look to them, and you're just kind of shooting at them forever or just for a few seconds, depending on what gun you got. I actually are the worst part of this game for me. I did not like any of the bosses. I would just rather play the stages themselves, and maybe have one boss at the end, because you have to fight 2 bosses per stage. I just kind of got tired of fighting them.
Yeah, this the sentiment is similar. It's kind of like a reverse. God, that pile of shit Kendo Rage we played not too long ago, where the stages were awful, but the bosses were a lot of fun. I found most of the fun on here is rolling through those stages. Sometimes steamrolling through the stages, and you get to the bosses and they look good. If you're looking at a still picture, it's very impressive. But yeah, there's a bizarre lack of animation to those bosses, and they kind of just bob up and down. Usually the pattern's very predictable for all of them. They look impressive though, until they're set to motion. So yeah, that was a little bit of a letdown. And the bosses overall are pretty simple. Like I said, the patterns are easy to identify, and if you roll in the final form, most of the final forms, you'll get through it pretty quick.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's like a lot of shooters. If you do manage to get hit and you lose your powers, that's when those bosses become a lot harder. Not the first boss necessarily, but the other ones. If you don't have some kind of power up, or your companion, or even your super form at that point, you might have some difficulty with them, just because they do take a while to kill, and they do throw some weapons at you. So the first boss of that ship, the second level is like a building that snakes pop out of. The third boss is the sports themed one. So he kind of looks like at first he looks like a sports playing bird, and then he kind of looks like a giant football with snakes on the side. These are very bad descriptions, but they're accurate if you see them.
No, you can't describe almost any of the enemies in this game. You just don't know what the hell half of what you're shooting at is. Like, it's insane. Like, there's one stage where you're shooting at cubes with pictures on them, and a fucking mechanical triceratops.
And don't forget, there's one that literally is. He looks like a pile of garbage.
It's a pile of garbage.
Yeah, I thought it was supposed to be Pizza the Hut from Spaceballs. I wasn't quite sure who that was, but then I realized it's supposed to be like a trash heap that comes in. That's the same level with the building with the snakes that pop out. The fourth level is underwater, which is the first time I actually had a problem with the game. It doesn't make it play any different, but there were a lot of things just flying at you throughout that level. That boss is some kind of glowy flower. that I think was not necessarily difficult, but again, if you don't have a power up, the boss actually moves to spots of the screen you can't hit with your basic weapon. So there's a lot of dodging, and it takes a long time if you don't have a power up. The level 5 boss has actually it's kind of a group of 3 people. It's got Cruel, who's the dinosaur boss that's actually the same end boss as the Bonk series. I guess that's how it ties all together. And he has a friend that has like a fin for a head, and then he's got a guy that I'm pretty sure it's supposed to look like he has a big bulging brain, but it just kind of looks like Testicle Head.
The description of this, it's the first time in the history of this podcast, just listening to the description of this game, I just think, what are we doing here?
What?
This is one that if anybody that I actually knew, like family or something, listened to it, I would probably be like almost just like, oh no.
You can skip the Air Zonk episode. Yes. But yeah, no, Testicle Head's a pretty accurate description of that guy, right?
Yeah, I mean that's what he looks like. He looks like a testicle head with some antennas sticking out.
Yeah, it's clear.
And what makes it worse for Testicle Head is not just that he has what looks to be 2 round balls for a head, but they're supposed to be kind of a big veiny head, but instead it just looks like ball hair. So he really does look like Testicle Head. It's a very unfortunate look. Since the rest of the game looks so cartoony and together, even the rest of those of the 3 people of that boss fight don't look bad. But Testicle Head is probably something I'm going to put all over our Twitter feed because it has to be seen to be believed. But level 5, the last level, is... I don't want to say the other levels weren't good because I think they were fine. They were good shooter levels. Level 5 is great. The last level it's kind of long. It's the one where it has those... Once you get into the like, there's an intro where you fly to the base, essentially, in level 5, and you fight some guys. And then when you get to the base, there's a throwback level to Bonk. But it's clearly done where it looks like they drew... someone has a bunch of panels that they drew on to look like a Bonk level, which I thought was awesome. I thought that was actually almost like a reward. It's like, hey, if you play through the rest of this game, here's what you get. This cool Bonk throwback level that then at the end all the pieces kind of go away, and that's what those cubes are, is supposed to, I guess, be parts of this virtual reality machine that's supposed to look like Bonk. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was a neat touch to it. I thought that was actually a level I'd never played before because I never got through the underwater level when I owned it. But I mean, great level. And I wonder how many people actually got to that.
I did, but then I got to the inevitable boss rush immediately after. And that's about when I just kind of tapped out because, I mean, we've talked about boss rushes on this show before, and I felt like I did my part with the Kendo Rage boss rush and made it through. And this one, I tried it 3 or 4 times, and I just didn't have it in me. I just didn't have the life force to get through another boss rush. Yeah,
and that Bonk throwback, I was thrilled with that. I was very excited. And I had played the original Bonk, a while back, and it was instantly recognizable. But yeah, I was very pleased with that. Not so pleased when the rush began, not too long after. I just hate those in every game. And the worst part was the weapon I had at the time. It was a missile or like a bomb, but you can only drop it down. So I had a lot of trouble kind of maneuvering the weapon I had at the time, and the boss fights this time were longer than they were the first time through when I had the companion that the stage kind of recommended for you.
You know what actually just really sucks about that boss rush is just how awesome that whole stage is, especially right before you get to that boss rush where you're fighting Testicle Head. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's this super fast level. There's shit just going down everywhere. It's such a fun fight. You're dodging bullets everywhere, and it really gets your adrenaline up, and it's so much fun. And then it just grinds to a halt with that boss rush, and it just took the air out of the room as soon as that very first ship boss scrolled up on screen.
Yeah, thankfully it's a short enough game. There's only 5 levels, so the boss rush is those 4 bosses, and then you do fight Testicle Head and Fin Head at the same time, which I thought was also a good fight, but you have to get through the other 4 bosses to get there. And then you fight King Cruel, who I thought... Now, you didn't get this far, Jeremy, but Billy, I thought this was the only boss of the game that honestly, I wasn't sure if I was going to finish because I thought it was a bad mechanic. When you're fighting the last boss, there are these blue, I don't even know what they're supposed to be, but they basically look like blue homing stars that come in and hit your character. And when they hit your character, you can't shoot.
Yeah.
So I don't know if there was a way to get rid of them that I wasn't following, but shooting them wasn't working.
No, I'm not aware of anything either, and it just seems like, and I was getting very frustrated because it seems like a hit that you have to take. I don't know any way around it. And yeah, this boss fight, this game, I feel like boss fight wise, took it easy on you the whole time. This last one, it's frustrating. It's difficult for the wrong reasons. I think there are a lot of cheap mechanics in there. That being, the biggest one.
Yeah, the rest of it was cheap attacks, but they were dodgeable. I didn't have too many other problems, but the fact that essentially for 3/4 of the fight you couldn't shoot and hit the boss. You couldn't do anything. You were trying to fire and nothing would happen until eventually you dodge enough things where those stars fade for a minute. You can shoot a few more, but while that's happening, more stars are shooting at you that are sucking up your ability to shoot. I mean, that was the closest I came to quitting this time. I did finish it, which is good. That's a first for a couple episodes, but I came real close to saying, you know what? I got to the last boss. This is good enough for me. But I did finish it, thankfully. So overall, now that we've played, I think this is our 4th Turbografx game, if you include Splatterhouse in that description. Is this a good Turbografx game?
Definitely. I think so. I mean, this is a great shooter. This would be a high watermark for the Turbografx on its own. And knowing that we've got some Bonk games out there to eventually play makes me feel better about the Turbografx. But this is definitely a game that I would still recommend to anyone that's a fan of shooters or cute-em-ups in general.
Yeah, and this so far, is it a good Turbografx game? It's the best one I've played so far for this podcast. When Bonk inevitably comes back around, we'll see then. And we'll see what other surprises are out there. Yeah, but so far, this is it's a very solid game. And I don't even think, because I'm not the biggest, shooter fan out there, and I still enjoyed it. I think if you are a fan of Bonk at all, you'll enjoy it. I think this is a game that's well worth giving a shot.
So this is one of those games, if I went over to my friend's house and they had it and I played it, I would be super jealous that it wasn't on the Super Nintendo Genesis.
Yeah. This is pretty much, this type of game is what I sat around and pouted about all the time because I knew I was missing out on.
Well, it took a listener request, but finally, we've played a Turbografx game that all three of us enjoy, not just me. And so thank you, Marty, for giving us a game on a system that I love that I apparently like all the wrong games. So next episode, as we teased last week, is going to be one of my all-time favorites. Somehow, both Jeremy and Billy have not played Kid Icarus up to this point for the Nintendo. So we're going to do Kid Icarus for the Nintendo Entertainment System, a guaranteed classic, and I mean it when I say it this time, of a game that I would be amazed if either of you don't like it.
It's going to be interesting. I mean, how many times do you get the chance to play I know Kid Icarus is a classic. But I'd never played it, and to just that would be like being saying like, well, I've never played Zelda, and to be able to play Zelda for the first time in 2016. So this is one of those rare games I'm actually looking forward to, because I feel like I actually did miss out on something that everyone loves, and just never played it.
And I feel the exact same. And looking back, I have no clue why I never did play this. I mean, it certainly was there to rent. It was there to buy. I had friends that played this, and it wasn't that I was against it in any way. I don't know why I never got around to it. So I am looking forward to it. It's one of the few Nintendo games that is indeed considered a classic that I never got around to.
Yes, next episode's 29 years in the making. Hope everyone's very excited about it. But do we have a listener question for this episode?
We do have a listener question. From loyal listener Ron, and he asks the following. Now, we've all had the same problem at least once. We've lost our progress in a game, whether it was because of a power outage or a battery running out, or just forgetting to save. All those hours of gameplay go to waste. What is the most frustrating loss of progress you've had in a game, and how did it happen?
Well, we talked about this a little bit with Guardian Legend, I think, where we complained about old Nintendo passwords that you just miswrote somehow and lost progress. That definitely happened a number of times, but nothing that I think was tragic, truly tragic. I guess the most time I lost on a game was actually recent. I had upgraded my computer, not upgraded, but I actually bought a whole new computer right after I bought Skyrim. So I had put about 50 hours into Skyrim, and I guess I just never put my saves on Steam. So then when I re-downloaded everything, I didn't have any of my saves. And I thought, I just lost 50 hours of time. But thankfully, I learned enough in my first playthrough that I probably got back to where I was in 50 hours in about 12. So I don't consider that a major loss, but at least the most recent one I can think of. But what I did have happen this past weekend is I came home from my out-of-town trip, and I went in the living room where my Wii U is set up, and there were games just sitting out on the counter. I normally don't do that because I have a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old. I know better than to leave my things out where they're by hands. And the Mario Kart case was open, and I opened it up, and someone had broken the disc entirely in half.
Oh.
So I didn't lose any progress because it's Mario Kart, but essentially I lost $60.
Oh, that's the worst. I bet no one claimed responsibility for that one.
No one has said a word. No one.
Man, that's rough.
God, I'm sorry. I'd say mine. Mine's It's clear. I was not big on RPGs. I'd only played a couple, but I got caught up in the Final Fantasy VII hype when it rolled into town, and I spent just countless hours. I had my parents on different occasions call me into school sick. I spent entire weekends playing this game. I did all the breeding, all the the side quests, all the little gambling side games on there, and I leveled everybody up, high. I found everybody's limit breaks. I dumped a lot of time into this thing, and heading into the last battle, you're in kind of a cavern, kind of a cave system, and you're given an item called a tent. And the tent you're able to use anywhere, along that cavern area to create a save point. And I created just a perfect save point right before the boss fight. There's no altercations after the save to the boss. And I fought the boss that night, Sephiroth, and I was defeated, and it was already late. And I said, well, I've got this save. I'm going to go to school. I'm going to come back home, and I'm going to finish it up. And I was using, at the time, my Sony brand PlayStation memory card was full up. So I had went out and I had purchased another one. The only one I could find was not an official brand. I can't recall who made this one, but this is one of those that touted that it had like 10 times the storage.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Made a mistake.
And it had, 2 little buttons. You set it to A1, A2, and so on, and it goes up to like D. And each one is supposed to have, the amount of memory of one card. And, it's what it was. And at the time, what did I know about memory cards? I mean, this is my first real dealing with them. And I got home from school. I sat down. I turned it on, and there was no option to load anything. I could start a new game. It probably took it was probably just a few seconds before I was sweating. I was sitting there, and and I got down and I restarted it, and I went and I got down on the memory card and I hit the different. I couldn't remember where it was saved. I thought it was A1. I cycled through each one of those, just hoping, and it turned out that it was lost. And we're talking 70, 80 plus hours spent on this game. And to be that close, if it was nowadays, I just would have got on YouTube and looked up the ending, and I would have been quite content. But yeah, I put off Final Fantasy VII. I put it away for about a year, and did not return to it for quite a while. And then, ended up playing through, dumped about the same amount of time into it again. It was just a dramatic incident.
I totally forgot about the off-brand PlayStation memory cards. That would have been a nightmare.
The PS1's the only one that could get away with it, because by the time the PS2 came around, everybody was wise to it.
Yeah, you didn't. If you ever saw any of those that had like 2x, 3x, and this went on throughout like the Dreamcast days with those high memory VMUs that they used to have or whatever. Those were just as faulty. Like I don't know of anyone that had one of those that it didn't go bad on them. So those I stayed away from those things.
Yeah, I learned my lesson after that. But I mean, at the time, I thought I was getting a deal.
If you didn't know any better, which none of us really did, unless you just had a friend that was like, "Oh man, this thing just crapped out on me for no reason." You just didn't know. I guess I've got a couple. One was every year for spring break we would go down to Kentucky, and for the longest time I didn't have a Nintendo, but my cousin down in Kentucky did, and he had gotten Super Mario Brothers 3. So we spent a good entire day playing through that game, and we got all the way to the last world with the crazy skyboats or skyships, whatever the hell they are, and was just going through that, and for some reason his aunt needed to go to Walmart, so we were like, all right, and we made the fatal mistake that just about every single kid back then made, and we left the Nintendo on and was just like, we'll finish it when we get back. And so we got back, and the Nintendo was off, and the amount of progress that we had lost was probably 2 or 3 worlds. I was just crestfallen. It was so exciting to get to that point and be like, oh man, we're gonna do this, and it's just not there anymore. So that sucked. But probably the biggest one for me was when I was a kid playing the original Legend of Zelda. And I had gotten all the way up to the last dungeon, and I did basically what Billy did. I went to school, and I was going to come back home and finish the game. And I got home, and there was no save file there on the cartridge anymore. You've got 2 or 3 different ones you can pick from. There was a save file there, but it was the very beginning of the game. And it turned out that my very young cousin at the time had been there earlier in the day, and he decided that he wanted to play Zelda, and obviously he didn't know any better. He didn't know what he was doing, so he started a brand new game and saved over my entire save file with just starting out brand new. And I'm going to blame him as the reason I have never beat a Zelda game in my entire life, because that's when it started. I was just like, I'm not going to play this anymore. I'm never going to play this. I'm never going to get that far again. Don't even know how the hell I even got that far in the first place with some of the shit that I had to do in that game. And it just wasn't worth it. It bummed me out, I think, for like a good week. To spend that much time on something and just have it tossed right out the window. It really, really sucks, especially when you're a kid.
That's the beginning of Jeremy's Zelda curse.
Yeah,
it really has. Someday, I'm going to beat a damn Zelda game and finally do away with this. But I think that's where it started, right there.
So if you have a question for us, please send us to us. We're on Facebook, on Twitter. You can cut out all the middlemen and just go to retrovania.net, where there are links to all those things. Please check us out there. We have lots of videos we put up. We put these feeds up for the podcast as well. And again, on Facebook and Twitter, lots of different information. If you want to see a picture of Testicle Head, it will definitely be on Twitter when this posts. So until next time, when we get into Kid Icarus for the Nintendo, a guaranteed hit. Check us out on retrovania.net, and we'll see you next time.